Magandang umaga, magandang tanghali, magandang gabi sa inyong lahat. Yan ang ating pagbati sa lahat ng mga nanonood at nakikinig sa atin. Ito po yung ating tinatawag na Rita Gadi's Hour, which is actually your hour. At sa haba ng panahon na tayo ay nag-uusap, sa dami na ng mga pinapadala ninyo, ng mga comments at mga like at yung sinasabi nga pwede mag-share, nagpapasalamat po ako. Sapagkat ang ating ginagawa dito ay tinitingnan natin ang mga aral na dapat natin sana patuloy, yung mga nangyari sa nakaraan, na wala namang nagkikwento kung ano talaga yung nakaraan na yon. At sa mga bagay-bagay na kailangan natin ayusin sapagkat marami ng napatong-patong na mga iba't ibang mga storya. So many other narratives have gone over and over and have covered exactly what has been happening in the past. We have been given this opportunity. Itong ating Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino, isa itong hindi lang political party, ngunit isang nationwide movement. Simulan ito sa tinatawag nilang Save the Nation upang tayo lahat ay magsama-sama at tingnan natin ang ating magagawa. Paano ba natin mapagbubuklod ang ating mga pag-iisip, ang ating mga damdamin, lahat ng ating mga nais sa buhay at nais natin ipagawa. We are in the middle of a pandemic and we do not know how long this will last. There is a vaccine that is being developed not only in one country but in several countries of the world. We have received invitations to participate in trials and possibly in coordinated efforts so that we can understand what this vaccine is all about. One of the first actually to declare that they are willing to give us this vaccine, to share with us the effects of this and how it can be given for a general basis, is the Russian Federation, and President Vladimir Putin has actually informed our president, and our president in turn has informed the nation that the vaccine may be available sometime by midsummer next year. There will still be just one test that will have to be undertaken, and after that we can be able to have this vaccine available for general use. There are also offers coming from the People's Republic of China. Marami din ang gagaling sa mga iba't ibang mga pharmaceutical firms, galing sa United States of America. Pero alam naman natin na uunahin nila ang pagbibigay ng vaccine na yan sa kanilang mga tao doon, lalong-lalo na ngayon na maraming lugar o tumataas itong mga cases ng COVID-19. Be that as it may, we also have other countries in Europe, in Germany, in Italy, and other countries that are also developing a kind of vaccine. As we have tried to elaborate and possibly explain as best as we could, a vaccine is merely to strengthen our immunity against a certain sickness, against a certain virus. Marami ng mga naimbento na nagawa at marami na rin nagamit ng mga vaccines sa nakaraan, but it is no guarantee that you will be absolutely free of the virus for which that vaccine is being taken in or being ingested. Kagaya ng flu vaccine, yan ay binibigay taon-taon. May mga vaccine din na binibigay habang bata pa, yung mga newly born. Meron din sila mga vaccine na binibigay para hindi magkaroon ng mga certain diseases na kaagad makukuha ng mga kabataan. So maraming klase ito. Hindi ito gamot. Ito ay isang klase na kanilang naimbento upang magkakaroon tayo ng kaunting, well, they call it an iota, a little drop of that deadly virus ingested into our system so that we can develop an antibody or we can develop a defense. Kaya lahat po yan ay sa kasalukuyan pinag-uusapan. Mga presidente, mga leaders, lahat ng mga involved dito sa science na ito, lalo na yung mga nasa health workers, yung mga virologists, yung mga epidemiologists, lahat ng mga yan. Ngunit ang mahalaga dito ay kagaya ng ating sinasabi sa ating programa, itong ating Rita Gadi's Hour. Marami din tayong ibang dapat matutunan sa mga nakaraan upang alam natin talaga kung ano ang ating hinaharap at ano ang kailangan natin gawin. Sa araw na ito, in this particular hour, nais kong balikan yung tinatawag na Proclamation 1081. Ano yan? Yun yung proclamation ng martial law sa Pilipinas na itinalaga ni President Ferdinand E. Marcos noong September 21, 1972. Mahalaga po ito na balikan natin sapagkat sa kasalukuyan marami masyadong pinag-uusapan tungkol dito sa martial law na ito. At ang lumalabas dito sa mga pag-uusap na yan ay yung mga torture, yung mga tinatawag na mga naging biktima ng human rights, yung mga nasaktan, yung mga na-torture, yung mga masasama. At madalas nga dito, dinudugsong nila na ginamit daw yung martial law ni President Marcos upang magpayaman, upang magnakaw, upang siya ay maging presidente habang buhay. Kaya yun ang malungkot. Ang nangyayari dito ay hindi siguro natin talagang nalalaman bakit ba kinailangan na magkaroon tayo ng martial law nung panahon na yon. Anong ginawa ni President Marcos nung panahon na yon at naisip niya na magdeklara ng martial law? Martial law is a legal provision. Nasa ating fundamental law yan, nasa ating constitution. Ang sinasabi nga dyan na ang presidente, kung sa isip niya ay magkakaroon ng threat sa national security, merong threat ng invasion, merong threat ng rebellion, lahat yan ng mga threat sa national security, kaya niyang magdeklara ng tinatawag na martial law. Nangyari ito sapagkat noong August 21, yan, maraming nagdiriwang at maraming nag-aalala kung anong nangyari noong August 21. Yun ang simula at hindi naman simula. Doon ang nag-trigger kung bakit kinailangan si President Marcos ang sabi nga niya, magdeklara ng suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. Ano ibig sabihin nun? Yun ang una niyang ginawa. Ang background niyan, doon sa mga marahil ay marami sa atin, marami sa inyo, ay hindi pa pinapanganak noong 1972. Ito na yung bagong generation natin. Hindi na matatawag na basta millennials, ngunit lampas na sa panahon na yon. Noong 1972 at prior to that, tandaan niyo si President Marcos ay presidente noong 1966. 1965 na elect siya na presidente, nagkaroon siya ng re-election. Kaya simula nung kanyang administration ay iba't ibang bagay na ang nangyayari. Kaya kinailangan nung bandang August 1972 nagkaroon ng malaking pagbobomba sa Plaza Miranda. Ano ba yan na pagbobomba na yan? Yun ang simula ng campaign period para sa national elections. Kaya mga senador at yung mga magkakandidato para sa mga iba't ibang posisyon, lalong-lalo na dito sa Metro Manila, hindi pa tinatawag ito na National Capital Region. Metro Manila pa ang tawag noon. Yung mga kandidato noon for senator, naisip nila na at yung mga kandidato rin for mayor of Manila at mga ibang mga posisyon dito sa kalakihan ng Metro Manila, ay nagkaroon sila ng rally. Parang political rally. Parang yun ang kanilang simula ng kanilang campaign period. Wala pang restrictions noon. Kaya August pa, kahit na yung halalan ay magaganap sa November, nagkaroon na sila ng parang salvo. Yun ang kanilang unang-unang paglabas sa mga publiko, lalong-lalo na sa panahon na yon. Ang incumbent president noon, si President Marcos. Anong nangyari? Malaking rally ito sa Plaza Miranda. Saan ba ang Plaza Miranda? Kayo, alam niyo yan. Pero yung mga hindi pa pinapanganak ng panahon na yon, doon madalas nagkakaroon ng tinatawag na political rally sapagkat maluwag yung lugar at ito ay harap ng simbahan ng Quiapo. At sabi ko nga, sa laki ng lugar na yon, siguro mga thousands na, 100,000 pwedeng mga taong makikinig kung sino man yung magrarally doon. Political rallies usually doon nagsisimula. Bago yung tinatawag ng mga meeting de avance at lahat yung mga iba't ibang mga pagkakataon na sila ay magsasalita sa publiko, hindi pa kasi nauuso nun yung magsalita ka doon sa Quirino Grandstand. Tandaan niyo, ang laki-laki niyan, luneta yan hanggang doon sa Rizal Park. Ngunit doon sa Plaza Miranda, kaya mong punuin yung lugar na yon. Kaya doon ginanap noong August 21, yung kanilang political rally ng Liberal Party. Nabanggit ko na sa mga nakaraan nating pag-uusap there were only two political parties at the time. You had the Nacionalista Party, and that was the party of President Marcos and the rest of the other elected officials. And then you had the Liberal Party. Sila yung parang opposition sa Nationalista Party sapagkat sila ang hindi nakapoder. In other words, whenever they are not in positions of power, they are considered as the opposition. Kagaya na nangyari nung panahon ni President Magsaysay. Siya naman ang Nationalista Party, ang opposition naman doon, mga liberal. So ganun ang nangyayari sa palipat-lipat kung sino man ang may kapangyarihan at may hawak ng pinakamataas dyan sa mga political parties na yan, which is the office of the President. But at the time, there was this big rally of the political candidates. Ang mag-MC or Master of Ceremonies ng political party na yon ay si Senator Benigno Aquino Jr., si Ninoy Aquino. Siya ang mag-MC. Ngunit wala siya doon. Hindi siya dumating. Maraming storya kung nasaan siya. Basta hindi siya dumating. O kung nung dumating man siya, tapos na yung pagbobomba. Ang nangyari doon ay, habang nagsasalita yung mga kandidato, may mga nagtapon ng granada doon sa entablado. Maraming namatay, maraming nasaktan. Si Senator Salonga nga, na kandidato doon, naputulan pa ng daliri. Si Mayor Bhagat Singh, na kandidato siya noon sa pagka-mayor, naputol din yung kanyang isang paa. Maraming talagang napinsala, lalong-lalo na yung mga nakaupo doon sa entablado. Because of that bombing of Plaza Miranda, at marami na kasing incidents prior to that, kinailangan na sabi nga ni President Marcos, hulihin kaagad kung sino yung mga may kasalanan noon. Kaya he suspended the writ of the habeas corpus immediately. Ang ibig sabihin noon, pwede mag-aresto na wala nang kinatawag na pupunta ka pa sa korte, na meron ka pang arrest warrant, na magagaling sa korte. In other words, you do not have to file a complaint with the court to be able to obtain a warrant of arrest for a certain individual or certain individuals. With the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, lahat ng mga pagsususpetsahan na merong kaalaman doon sa pagbomba ng Plaza Miranda, pwede nang hulihin. So doon, parang preparatory na yan, doon sa declaration of martial law. Marami na rin nag-uusap tungkol dyan. Maaari siguro magde-declare na ng martial law si President Marcos. Sinulat ko nga, sa kanyang pahayag tungkol dito, sinulat ni President Marcos ang mga dahilan kung bakit kinailangan siya na pagkatapos ng bombing sa Plaza Miranda ng August 21, kinailangan siyang mag-declare ng martial law sa September 21, 1972. Yung mga dahilan dyan, sabi nga niya, unang-una, 7 ang sabi niya. There are 7 sources, 7 elements that are happening throughout the country where there is already practically anarchy na kinakailangan mag-declare ng martial law to be able to hold peace and order from the center of government, which is by the office of the President. Unang-una, sabi niya, ang mga komunista. Lumalakas na sila at ang malaking suspetsa, ang gumawa ng pagbomba sa Plaza Miranda ay mga komunista. Kaya number 1, yun ang sinasabi nga niya, because the communists are getting more aggressive and they're more open when it comes to bombing and killings, kailangan sila ang una na maging source kung bakit kinailangan mag-declare ng martial law. Ang katotohanan niyan, saka ko na lang pero idudugsong ko na. Ang nangyari nga, for about 14 years from the bombing of Plaza Miranda, they were blaming President Marcos. Kasi siya daw yung nasa administrasyon ng panahon na yon, kaya siya ang nagbomba sa Plaza Miranda para ubusin ang opposition laban sa kanya. Anong nangyari? For 14 years, yan kanilang sinasabi yan. Pagkatapos ng 1986, nung wala na sila President Marcos, ang sinabi nga doon, ang nangyari, yung mga nagbomba mismo, naglabasan na at nagmalaki. At sinabi nila, kami ang nagbomba sa Plaza Miranda. Andyan na sila Victor Corpus, Lieutenant Victor Corpus ng panahon na yon, ngayon general na-appoint na nga sa iba't ibang posisyon. At maraming mga mataas, high-ranking communist leaders, they all came out and they were bragging. Hindi lang bragging, they admitted that they bombed Plaza Miranda. Doon na lumabas. Maraming nagsalita, maraming publications tungkol dyan. After 14 years, after blaming President Marcos, Then the communists came out at sinabi na nga na sila ang responsable doon. Tandaan ninyo, nahuli na nga nung panahon ni President Marcos yung mga commander ng mga sa mga New People's Army. Si Jose Maria Sison, isa yan sa mga mastermind nga sa pagbobomba ng Plaza Miranda. Isa na rin siya na nahuli at nakulong at pinakawalan ni Mrs. Aquino nung siya ay naging presidente na. Anyway, yun ang isa sa mga elements, isa sa mga dahilan kung bakit kinailangan mag-declare ng martial law noong 1972. Bakit kinailangan pirmahan ni President Marcos yung tinatawag na Proclamation 1081. Ang isa pang elemento, one other source why martial law had to be declared, and sabi nga ni President Marcos, because of the rightist elements, yung extreme right, na sabi nila kailangan magkudeta para labanan si President Marcos at tanggalin na siya na pagka-presidente. Ang pangatlo dyan ay yung Mindanao Independence Movement. Tandaan ninyo, noong 1966 pa, nagsimula na yan, yung independence movement na yan. Mga iba't ibang mga paksyon sa Maguindanao, hindi pa Maguindanao noon, Cotabato pa lang noon. Sa Cotabato at sa mga Lanao, dalawang Lanao yun, Lanao Sur, Lanao del Norte. Tapos yung North Cotabato at South Cotabato, yan mga lugar na yan, sa Hulo, sa Basilan, sa Tawi-Tawi, lahat dyan, ang mga tao, lalo na yung mga nasa Muslim movement, sila ang nagdeklara na we want to be independent from the Republic of the Philippines. Kaya patuloy pa yung secessionist movement na yan, yung kanilang independence movement. Kaya kinailangan nga na eventually later on, napuntahan yung source ng supply ng mga ammunitions, yung supply ng lahat ng mga technical at mga logistical hardware na binibigay dito sa mga nagsisisid na yan sa Mindanao Independence Movement, diyan sa Southern Mindanao. In fact, sabi nga, ang laki na nagagastos ng Philippine government para sa ating mga sundalo para labanan yung mga nagre-rebelde na yan. Ang pang-apat naman ay tungkol sa mga private armies. Nung panahon na yon, ang mga police forces ay nasa ilalim ng mga mayor, nasa ilalim ng mga governor. Ang nangyari kasi sa haba ng panahon na sila ang may hawak sa mga police, yung mga police naging private army. Kung sino man ang incumbent na mayor o sino man ang incumbent na governor, yung police force na nasa ilalim niya ay private army na niya. Anong ginagawa? Yan ang nagte-threaten sa mga kalaban nila. Kung hindi man na nagte-threaten, nagpapatay ng kanilang mga kalaban sa politika. Kaya yan ang nangyari. The police force became the private army of these political warlords. Kaya yun ang tawag sa kanila. Kung papasok sila halimbawa sa isang nightclub at meron silang nakitang kalaban nila doon sa politiko, may barila na yon, patayan na. Ganyan na nangyayari. Pag minsan nga sa open, hindi na halos tinatago. Naalala nyo nangyari noon. Si Crisologo nasa simbahan at palakad siya papunta sa komunyon, binaril siya sa loob ng simbahan. Anong ginawa ng kanyang anak? Sapagkat gusto niya ipaghiganti yung pagkabaril sa kanyang ama. Yan ang political fight diyan sa Ilocos Sur. Sinunog naman niya yung buong baryo kung saan pinagsuspetsahan na doon ang galing yung mga bumaril sa kanyang ama. Ganon ang sitwasyon ng panahon na yon. Ang tawag nga dyan yung political warlords, ang gamit nila mga pulis o hindi man pulis, nagdagdag pa sila ng mga ibang goons na tinatawag nga mga armed people, mga armed personnel, at yan ang kanilang private army. Isa yan sa mga bagay na umiiral noong panahon na yon. Kaya naisip nga na kailangan na magkaroon tayo ng martial law. Ang paglima naman dyan ay itong mga oligarchs. Naku, hanggang sa kasalukuyan, yan pa rin ang pinag-uusapan. Yung mga oligarchs na yan, yun yung mga talagang super rich. Mayayaman sila. Tama nga naman na nagnenegosyo sila. Ngunit sa kanilang pagnenegosyo, kinailangan kasi na maraming tao sila na natatapakan, maraming politiko na kanilang ginagamit para yung kanilang mga kinakailangan na mga batas para ipagpatuloy kung ano man yung kanilang ginagawa ay mapagpatuloy sapagkat may pera sila. Sila na rin ang bumibili ng mga tao na halimbawa sa customs, kung saan-saan, sila na rin ang medyo nag-aayos, nagre-remedyo sa kanilang mga income taxes. Kaya yung mga oligarchs na yan, nung panahon na yon ay sila ang parang mga hari na nagko-control ng financial at ng economic movement ng ating bansa. Kaya ang nangyayari dyan, pag sinasabi nga, the rich get richer, and the poor get poorer. Yan ang nangyayari. Sapagkat yan, mga oligarchs, sila ang may hawak. Hawak nila ang economic programs, hawak nila ang financial institutions, hawak nila mga politiko na pwede magpatuloy doon sa kanilang mga ginagawa. Isang bagay yan na nagkakaroon din ng influence kung bakit magulo at hindi ayos ang ating bansa when it comes to the correct kind of governance kapag hindi sila makontrol. May pera Yun ang mahirap dyan. Ang pang-anim naman dyan, yung mga criminal elements. Dumadami na ang mga nagnanakaw, yung mga nagre-rape, yung mga lahat na ng klaseng crime. Tumataas ito sapagkat yun na nga. Ang mga pulis na babayaran, ang mga pulis na gagamit as private army at sila na rin marahil ay kasama na rin ng panahon na yon na sila na rin na nagkikidnap, sila na rin na nagnanakaw, kung ano man yan. Ganun kagulo yung panahon na yon. Bakit hindi makontrol ito ni President Marcos ng panahon na yon? Sapagkat napakalakas ng influence ng mga may pera, yung mga oligarko, yung mga rightists, at madaling madaling magkaroon ng pera at madaling magbayaran sapagkat yun na nga, libre lahat ng tao na kahit na ano pwede nilang gawin. Walang disiplina at the time. Yun ang isa sa mga sources kung bakit kinailangan na mag-declare ng martial law. At ang pito, ito rin ang mabigat. Ito yung mga foreign interventions. Dito natin nakikita na ang ating ekonomiya, ang ating finance institutions, lahat ng palakad natin para mag-progress ay hawak ng mga finance institutions na hindi naman tayo nagko-control. Kagaya ng ating central bank, halimbawa. Hindi natin hawak yan. Hawak yan ng IMF, International Monetary Fund. Hawak yan ng kanilang World Bank. Hawak yan ng financial institutions na nanggagaling sa Britain at saka sa Amerika. Sila na rin ang nagtanggal ng tinatawag na gold standard. Ang ibig sabihin yan ay ang pera mo, ang katumbas ng halaga ng pera mo ay ang ginto na meron ka sa bangko. Tayo ang kung hindi tayo pinakamalaking na merong gold sapagkat bulubundukin talaga yung nakukuha natin ng gold dyan sa Mountain Province. Bundok-bundok yan na meron tayong mga ginagawang mini-mint. We mint the gold at yan ang ating nakalagay sa central bank. Pero ang Amerika at ang Britain, wala naman silang sources na ganun kadami kagaya sa atin. Kaya ang backup nila, hindi ginto, ang backup nila papel. Sila ang magsasabi. Kaya nakikita nyo hanggang sa kasalukuyan, kasi nagkaroon sila ng isang Bretton Woods Agreement, nagsama-sama yung mga ibang finance institutions ng mundo at ang pinakamalaki dyan, yung sa Britain at saka sa Amerika, kanilang itinalaga na hindi na ginto ang magiging backup ng ating pera. Ang magiging backup niya ay kung anong sasabihin ng Britain at saka ng Amerika nung kanilang mga bangko, yung kanilang Wall Street, kung saan ang finance institutions na ng buong mundo doon umiikot. Yan ang oligarch din na global oligarchs na sila na rin ang nagdidikta. Kaya madalas nga ang gera sapagkat sa production mas malaki ang kita kung ang ipoproduce nila ay weapons at saka ammunition. Sila na rin ang nagdidikta sa mga bansa through the IMF and the World Bank. Ganito, magpapautang kami, ngunit malaki ang interest, pero kahit na habang buhay kayo magbabayad, okay lang. Basta tandaan ninyo may utang kayo sa amin. At dahilan nga na nagpapautang kami, ganito ang kailangan nyong gawin. Ito lang ang mga bagay na kailangan nyong italaga. Hindi kayo pwedeng mag-ayos ng inyong agrikultura sapagkat bibili kayo ng mga produkto namin. So you could see how, at the time, that was how the dictates of these finance institutions were controlling even the movement of our progress, such that we were not able to develop really as best as we could our agriculture. Anyway, so isa yon sa mga bagay, yung foreign intervention na yan, these financial institutions, and all of this, yung tinatawag nga sa Amerika, the CIA. Ngayon, ang tawag dyan, the deep state. Iba-iba lang ang pangalan, pero yan yung tinatawag na invisible government. Yan yung bureaucracy sa Washington, na sa habang panahon, sila ang tinagtitingin sa buong mundo kung ano ang mga bagay-bagay na for the interest of the United States of America. And interest nila, hindi interest ng mga bansa na yan. But they come with all of these platitudes sa sinasabi, this is for your benefit. This is for a democratic way of life. This is for freedom, justice, and democracy. Yun ang parati nilang ginagamit. Yung ideals for the foundation of the United States of America na tayo ang nakapagmana niyan. Tama naman, freedom, justice, and democracy. Ngunit, yung tinatawag nga na freedom, wala naman tayong freedom from them. Wala tayong freedom from those financial institutions that hold our economy. We have no freedom from their dictates coming from Washington. Sabi nga, walang nai-elect na presidente dito kung hindi gusto ng Amerika. Sila ang nagpapalakad yan. Hanggang nga sa pag-alis ni kay President Marcos, sila rin ang nagdikta. Basahin niyo yung libro ni George Shultz at doon talaga nakadetalya kung anong ginawa nila para tanggalin si Marcos. Basahin niyo yung libro ni Ashraf Pahlavi, yung twin sister ng Shah of Iran. Parehong-pareho din ang ginawa nila sa Iran. Basahin niyo yung sinulat ni Noriega kung paano siya tinanggal sa Panama. Doon din mababasa ninyo na parang carbon copy. Meron na silang template kung paano magtatanggal. Ang malungkot lang dito ay naging mas marahas. Kaya yung pagtanggal nila kay Saddam Hussein sa Iraq, ganon din na nangyari. Pagtanggal nila kay Gaddafi sa Libya, ganon din na nangyari. Ngunit pinatay nila itong mga leader na ito. Anyway, going back to the sources, as I've said, the elements that have caused President Marcos to declare martial law. So maliban sa foreign intervention na yan na pinag-uusapan ko, andyan din ang foreign media. There are many articles that have been written and published. How the media has contributed to the removal of President Marcos. Ang dami dyan nakasulat. As a matter of fact, there are also other published published from doble-doble na. There are many publications that also detail how the American media, the Western media have destroyed the image of President Marcos, and whatever government they wish to destroy, the media is being utilized. They demonize the leader para makita ng buong mundo na justified sila for removing this leader. Masasaktan ng Amerika nito, ngunit sila rin ang nagsusulat nito. Hindi lang nila sinusulat, they just don't write about it, write about the errors that they have done and the crimes that they have committed, but they have also produced movies regarding this. As a matter of fact, they have also produced documentaries regarding the manner by which they remove leaders of the world, how they engage in wars of supposedly liberation, but actually it is simply for the interest of the United States of America, specifically for the natural resources, like what was done in Iraq, like what was done in Libya, and so forth. So anyway, those are already external factors, but you have foreign intervention, and that is where the awareness of how it is important to declare martial law was for the President Ferdinand Marcos. In fact, as I said, practically all movements, especially here in our country, where you have at that time the two largest military bases in our country, the Subic Naval Base and the Clark Air Force Base. And these are the two largest military installations outside of the mainland of the United States of America. So here you could see how important it is, as far as America is concerned, that we maintain that kind of a relationship with Washington's particularly. So because of these elements that are happening, because of these factors that are being undertaken, and as I've said, since we are still, yung sinasabi nga, may tali pa tayo, nakatali pa yung leeg natin sa mga kung anong gustong gawin ng Amerika, even the declaration of martial law was cleared with the high leadership of the United States of America. Parang sinasabi nga, the buck stops at the office of the President. Because you have the constitutional provision of declaring martial law, then you really should, in order to prevent yung para hindi magkahiwa-hiwalay, to prevent the disintegration of the country itself, because of all of these elements. Let me repeat, because of the communists that are already here in the streets in Metro Manila, they're bombing close to Malacanang, and they're overtaking a lot of territory, and they're already declaring that they want to take over government. Because of the left, the rightists, these are those in the extreme right who would also want to engage in a coup d'etat so that they could take over, feeling themselves better than President Marcos. Because of the Mindanao independence movement, where you have Mindanao, Sulu, Basilan, and Tawi-Tawi, the largest island in southern Philippines, and 3 other islands out there in the Celebes Sea, they wanted to declare the independence of the republic. Because of the private armies that have been using the police force as their own criminally infested movements and activities, because of crime, which has risen to a point that it is already very difficult to control, because they also have links to the private armies and to the oligarchs in a way, because there you have also the oligarchs who would want to be able to maintain the status quo, and that there would be changes that they would want in accordance with how they want it. They either buy the politicians or they buy the government institutions, pay their way through, and that is also one factor. Plus, of course, the criminal elements that have arisen, rape, kidnapping, murder, etc., precisely because the police force was practically almost out of control, and then you have foreign intervention. So I'm repeating that is the background for the declaration of martial law. Walang nag-uusap tungkol dyan. Some people have already tried to bring this out. I know, for instance, an author and a writer who was formerly a communist leader, Rita Gadi. He wrote a book about this, and also underlining exactly what they did in Plaza Miranda, and all of these elements that I'm relaying to you. Those were the factors that were able to make President Marcos declare martial law. Isa yan sa mga nagsulat. His book is available at the National Bookstore. The author is Rita Gadi, and several others who tried to come out with snippets of essays and articles, but there is not one consolidated article or book or writing that has spoken or has written about the reasons why martial law had to be declared. And the reason why I am bringing this back now, precisely because we have just finished August 21, and then next month there will be the declaration of martial law, September 21, and I am already anticipating that a lot of people in the opposition against President Duterte, and those that also opposed President Marcos, many of them are still alive, they would want to resurface again the declaration of martial law as a period of darkness and of torture. Now let us talk about the human rights violations that happened at that time. But before we go into that, let me first quote what the President said, President Marcos, when he declared martial law. He said, "This proclamation is exactly what is needed in order that we can have revolutionary change." Revolution means there is an upturn. There will be a complete change. And that's exactly what the President Marcos wanted to do. But this is not external. This is not violent. This is an internal revolution that is from the center. He would want to be able to turn around all of these bad elements, revolt against all of these bad elements that needed the declaration of martial law, and institute the kind of government that has an ideological base, which is for the great majority of our people. For what is a democracy if it is not for the poor? What is democratus? The rule of the majority. But do the poor people rule at this stage? No. We still have all of these elements at this stage. Kaya nga, si President Duterte, ano sabi niya? A war against illegal drugs, a war against criminality, a war against corruption. Ayan, tatlong bagay lang ang kanyang sinabi sa kanyang inaugural, but that is already the entire summary in 1972 why President Marcos had to declare martial law, which is the internal revolution of changing the kind of attitude, the kind of atmosphere, the kind of whatever is happening at the time. Yung mga nabanggit ko nga, yun ang kinakailangan that we have to revolt against. It is not a violent revolution. It is a revolution to institute and to create a new society. Merong awit yan, ang bagong lipunan. Sa mga pera nga, nakalagay yon. Bagong lipunan, nakalagay doon. Bakit? Kailangan magbago. Kailangan lahat ng akin binanggit kung bakit kinailangan ng martial law ay maalis, mawala, at magkaroon tayo ng bagong lipunan, a new society. And remember, the provision of martial law is legal. It is a constitutional provision. Kaya nga sinabi dito that constitutional prerogative is necessary to be able to protect, to secure, and to safeguard our country. Yan ang Proclamation 1081. Kinailangan ito sapagkat ang objective ng pag-declare ng martial law is precisely that, because we need to take care of the poorest of our society, because that is what democracy is all about. Karamihan kasi naghihirap, at yun na nga ang nangyayari. Naghihirap sapagkat hindi nakakaabot sa kanila ang benefits and opportunities. Kaya kinailangan na magkaroon ng mga reforma. Hindi lang reforma, a revolution to turn around na yung mga nakakarami na mahihirap, ang sila ay maangat. That was the idea for the Filipino ideology na tinatag ni President Marcos. Ang mga tao ang kailangan bigyan ng tulong at ang nakakarami ang mga taong naghihirap. So that is the national development that he has instituted in the new society, and that national development is the development of the great mass of our people who are poor. Yun ang kanyang sinimulan. Kaya anong ginawa niya? Nagtatag siya ng barangay. What is the barangay? Yung tinatawag nga grassroots level. Yung talagang pinaka-baseline, yung mga pamilya na nagsasama-sama sa isang barangay. Noon, baryo nga ang tawag dyan. Before, it was just an address. But President Marcos made it as a political institution on the grassroots level para doon magsisimula yung kanilang pag-iisip, ang kanilang mga pagnanais, lahat ng kinakailangan nilang gawin para sa kanilang buhay. Yun ang participatory democracy. Kaya pag titingnan natin, what was the new society all about? The formation precisely of that. The formation of the grassroots level that the people themselves can rule themselves. Nasira na lang sa haba ng panahon sa nangyari sa barangay. Ngunit yun ang sinimulan kung bakit ang barangay ngayon, they're elected by the people in the barangay. Kasi yung barangay noon, mga pamilya yan na magkakamag-anak. Yun ang simula ng baryo. Yung pamilya, lola, lahat yan, magkakamag-anak. Sa haba ng panahon, hindi na naging mga clustered of families. Clusters na lang. Kaya hindi na lang naging address of several families, naging pagsasama na lang sa isang lugar. It became more or less some kind of a territorial. Kaya yung political impact ng barangay na kinakailangan sila ang makakatulong sa isa't isa. Silang mga pamilya, that is supposed to be the village, the group of people, interrelated. Yung sinasabi kong madalas, the connectivity na kailangan merong pagsasamahan. Yun ang ideya ng barangay. Kaya pag sinasabi ko nga, nung panahon ng martial law, yan ang kanyang itinatag. A new society based on the poor who can be able to govern themselves from the grassroots level so that whatever their dreams are, their aspirations, and whatever they want to happen for their governance will be done there in that baseline sa mga nakakarami. Pero hindi na yan natuloy kasi nagkaroon na nga ng abuse, etc. Kaya ngayon kung titingnan ninyo, ilan yung daan-daang mga barangay officials na ngayon kakasuhan. Biruin ninyo, yung tulong na binibigay na ni President Duterte para magkaroon ng pagkain ng mga tao na walang trabaho, ay ninanakawan pa. Saan ang gagaling? Ayan, lumalabas ngayon sa mga barangay officials, dun sa mga nagtatrabaho sa gobyerno. Bakit nagkaganon? Anyway, wag na natin balikan ulit kung bakit nagkakaganon. Alam na natin ngayon sa lahat ng dinami-daming investigasyon at mga inquiry sa Congress, sa Senate, naglalabasan na yan, lahat na yan. Kasi sinabi nga ni President Marcos, what good is a democracy if it is not for the poor? Kasi binabalikan niya yung freedom, justice, and democracy. Yun ang talagang those are the sacred elements that we have inherited from the United States of America. But that democratic principles in all of these three are also applied in a different manner according to the culture, according to the nature and the culture of the people that are actually imbibing these values of freedom, justice, and democracy. America cannot dictate the way they want it done, the way they do it there in the United States of America. You must remember, when they had their civil war, or when they had this, what they wanted at the time was to be independent from Great Britain. That was the civil war. Those that were loyal to the United Kingdom and those that wanted to be independent. Dito sa atin, we had the Philippine Revolution. We wanted to be independent of a colonizing power, 400 years against Spain. Ngunit pumasok ang mga Amerikano. Nagpasalamat tayo na natanggal nila ang mga Kastila sapagkat yun na nga ang nag-api sa ating mga tao. Again, as we've said, no democracy at the time. But when the Americans came and we imbibed these values of freedom, justice, and democracy, we used it in accordance with our nature and our culture. And during the time of President Marcos, that's exactly what he said as far as this democratic revolution of the new society is all about. The justice that you ought to give everyone what is his due. Ano ba yan justice na yan? Na magkaroon ng, yan na, I have repeated it so many times, that every person will have all the basic needs and services na mabibigay ng pamahalaan. Basic needs and services of every individual and of every community of individuals. Hindi naman yan ibibigay na isa-isa sa bawat kamay o sa bawat kinakailangan yung communities na yan. Ano yan? Yung barangay, yung town, yung city, at yung probinsya, yan ang mga communities na yan. Mabibigay ng yan justice na yan sa kanila. Sa ano yan? How do you give justice to an individual and a human community from the government? Ilang beses ko na itong sinabi. Government should be taking care of the basic needs and services. Water, power, food, clothing, shelter, medical assistance, health services, education, mobility, infrastructure, social needs, and of course, yung sinasabi nga natin, sports, even sports and recreation. Magkakasama lahat yan. 11 basic needs and services coming from the government. Anong nangyari? Kung makikinig kayo dito sa programa ko at makikinig kayo sa mga sumusunod na programa ng Kilusang Demokratiko ng Pilipino, then you will realize that you have Sir Toti Casino, Sir Toti Carino, and Sir Toti Casino. And then you have also Sir Butch Valdez and Sir RJ Havellana. Sila ang parating nagpapataguyod ng tinatawag na basic services should be undertaken by the government for the people. Kaya ngayon nga pinopunteriya yung water and power supply. Hindi ba mahalaga yun? Pero sinong may kontrolado ngayon? Mga oligarko. Kaya yun ang masakit. Para bang umikot na naman ang mundo. Noon, yun na ang binibigay at yun na ang tinatag ng bagong lipunan na sinasabi nga ni President Marcos, of what value is democracy if it is not for the poor? Kaya noon siyan sinimulan. Nadidinig lang natin yan sa mga programa ng ating unang ginang, sa kanyang mga human settlements. Pero ito, palakad ito ng pamahalaan. At sinimulan ito nung nagtatag ang Presidente Marcos ng kanyang Filipino ideology at itinatag din ni Mrs. Marcos yung tinatawag niya, the ideology for the people, yan. Higit sa lahat ang tao. Kaya nga sinasabi, yung basic services na yan. That is the justice that every individual and every community should be receiving. And the next, in accordance with what President Marcos has declared, kinailangan din merong freedom. So lahat ng basic freedoms natin andyan na sa Bill of Rights, hindi po ba? Sa ating Constitution, time immemorial andyan na yan. Nakalista na dyan lahat ng mga freedoms na meron tayo. Ano pang dinagdag niya dyan? The freedom to be able to be a citizen of the world. Anong ibig sabihin nun? Na magkaroon tayo ng kalayaan na lahat ng bansa pwede natin puntahan. And that is where he instituted diplomatic relations with practically the entire member countries of the United Nations, including, at the time, the communist countries of the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation, which was, at the time, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And also, the opening of the veiled curtains of the Middle East. Kasi noon, wala pa tayong diplomatic relations dyan. Sinimula na rin yan. So, doon din nagsimula yung tinatawag natin na Filipinos can work abroad. Skilled and professional Filipinos can now work in any country in the world where there is an opening for them. Kasama na yan doon sa freedom and justice. Yan ang talagang pinagtibayan doon sa Filipino ideology. But the democracy, yun ang sinasabi nga ni President Marcos na hanggang sa kasalukuyan kinakailangan din natin ipagpatupad pa. Na dito nga sa participatory democracy ng mga barangay ay yan sana ang magbibigay bukas na mga oportunidad para sa ating nakakarami na magkaroon ng trabaho, para magkaroon ng livelihood. Sa kasalukuyan, ano nga ba ang nangyayari? Hindi lang dahilan nga sa pandemic na ito, ngunit sa mga nakaraang mga iba't ibang mga administrasyon, hindi na rin natin natulungan ang ating nakakarami. Why? Because everything else is controlled by the politicians and by the very, very rich. Wala tayong galit sa mga taong nagsisikap upang yumaman. Ngunit yan ang malungkot. Kasi ang kayamanan pag minsan ay nakakasira sa mga interest ng mga tao sapagkat lahat na lang pakikinabangan para sa sarili at hindi nabibigyan tulong ang nakakarami. At diyan natin makikita na ang public services na kailangan ang pamahalaan, ang namamahala, diyan pumupunta sa mga nakikinabang para sa kanilang sarili. Anyway, I go back and forth as far as the declaration of martial law is concerned sapagkat sinasabi nga, puro kasamaan ang lumalabas. Ito, babalikan ko ngayon yung human rights violations sapagkat madalas, hindi lang madalas, pero tuwing nagkakaroon ng pagbigkas ng martial law, ang dami-dami na sa mga kontrolado ng mga media, kontrolado ng mga oligarko, kasi ayaw na nila na magkaroon ulit ng kagaya ng panahon ni President Marcos, na merong mga limit naman, hindi lang basta lahat ng tao. Sabi nga ni Plato, you cannot own all the chairs in the world so that nobody else can have a chair to sit on. You cannot own all the houses in the world so that nobody else can have a house for themselves. Whatever it is, yung sinasabi nga na yung absolute control ng kayamanan, yun ang malungkot sapagkat yun na rin ang mga tao, ang mga hindi kaya na magkaroon ng oportunidad, kontrolado sila ng mga nakakayaman. I do not have to go back and forth with the economic structure of all of this. So many finance experts have written about this. Our Holy Father and so many other popes have already said how it is, take care of the poor, take care. But why is nobody taking care of the poor the way they should be taken care of? Anyway, so balikan natin yung sinasabi ko nga tungkol sa martial law at itong mga human rights violations. Okay. 11 taon ang declaration of martial law. At sinasabi nga ni Mrs. Marcos, tinatanong nga niya si President Marcos, bakit hindi mo na i-lift ang martial law? Remember, it was 1972 and it went on until 1981. So anywhere in between, yun ang parating tinatanong. According to Mrs. Marcos, tinatanong niya, bakit hindi mo pa i-lift ang martial law? Yan sabi nga ni President Marcos, sapagkat marami pa tayong kailangan na ayusin muna sa kasalukuyan. At isa nga sa pinakamahalaga na nagawa niya, even during martial law, yung pag-reduce nung hawak ng mga Amerikano, the reduction of the bases from 99 years in the original Military Defense Treaty Agreement to 25 years, and then further reducing it to 5 years to be reviewed by any incumbent president. Yun ang isang pinakamahalaga. One of the most important elements that he has undertaken during martial law was that was the freedom to be able to have control over the military bases in a way, because they're being utilized by the most powerful country in the world, and yet we are at the mercy insofar as what they say, the US aid that they're giving in exchange for those bases. And President Marcos was able to demand rental for the use of those bases because they are in Philippine territory. And he was able to say that instead of aid, you give rent. Because aid is depending on what your Congress in America will say. If this is so much only that you want to give, and whatever you want to give, there are also strings attached. That this is what you have to do for us to give you some finances. This is a sad commentary as far as this is concerned. And I know that Mrs. Marcos will be squirming when I talk like this. Because precisely, it might hurt some people in Washington. But they do this. That is the template that they do, not just with the Philippines, but practically with many countries throughout the world, precisely. So, let's get back to martial law and the statement that is being made by the opposition regarding this. If you have been incarcerated, if you ever were incarcerated during that period of martial law, if you were tortured, but of course, you will never be able to forget this. But, as I've said, during the 11 years of martial law from 1972 to 1981, there were no cases filed against the President Marcos or anybody of his administration regarding the violations of human rights. Although there was not yet a Commission on Human Rights, but you could file a complaint in court. You could file a case against abuse. You could file a case against torture, etc. Wala. From 1986, when President Marcos was and the Marcoses were no longer in power, were no longer here in the country, as a matter of fact, there were still no cases filed against them, criminal or civil, for human rights violation. The only case that they filed was the human rights violation case, so to speak, in Honolulu. And that was supposed to be done there because they say Marcos was a resident there in Hawaii. Well, even that is already a violation of the law, even of the United States of America. The parole visa of President Marcos does not say that he was a resident. He was an honored guest. Yun ang nakalagay sa kanyang parole visa, which he had to renew every month or so, and he had to have this acknowledgement by the immigration office that he is not threatening to leave the island of Oahu in Hawaii. So he is not a resident. Pero ang final nilang case against Marcos is because resident daw siya. Tinanggap ng Amerika yan even though it is a violation of their own law. Another violation is, according to American law, if there are human rights violation of anybody, particularly of a head of state, then it should be tried in the country of origin. So kailangan yung human rights na yan dun sa bansa kung saan nangyari yon. If the country of origin is favorable to those complainants. Panahon ni Mrs. Aquino yon, definitely favorable sa kanila. Again, another violation. And what were these human rights violations? 4 lang yan in the original case. Yung isa, namatay sa isang cannery sa Alaska at sabi niya na meron silang problema sa labor union and he was killed because of the fight with the labor union. And then his heirs said that he was killed because Marcos ordered his killing. But the person who already killed him was already in prison. Nasentensyahan na yung pumatay sa kanya, and ito sa labor dispute. Yung isa ay nagkaroon naman ng sinasabi nga that it was Amy Marcos who was actually the one that was offended, and so that person was tortured. Another one also complained that his father or his mother was also tortured during the time of martial law. And the other one was, and this is surprising for all of you perhaps, and you know this, Jose Maria Sison, a communist who was already incarcerated and who was released by Mrs. Aquino, and he was claiming that he was tortured or imprisoned by President Marcos. 4 lang yan. Dumami yan sapagkat sabi ng mga abogado na Amerikano, si Robert Swift, at sabi rin ng abogado dito sa Pilipinas, si Attorney Domingo, sabi, lakihan na natin kasi para mas malaki ang makukuha ng marami. And so they tried listing so many names. Kaya umabot yan. Now in media, they say there are 10,000 victims. Marami naging biktima ng torture by the military. But who is the command responsibility of the military? The Philippine Constabulary, kasi sila ang may direct link dyan sa mga taong inaaresto. And who was the head of the Philippine Constabulary at that time? Fidel V. Ramos. Kaya naku, mahaba pa yan. I will do this detail in another program so that you can understand this human rights violation. But I go back to what I said, that the reason why martial law was declared precisely because of these 4 elements that I have mentioned now. Now there are also movements, and we hear this, and a lot of statements said that we should have a revolutionary government. My goodness, do you know what a revolution is? Try to research your history so that you will know that a revolution is normally bloody, and a revolution devours its own children. So please do not play with this in your minds or even among your statements, because you know how it is. You know, the proclamation of a revolutionary change should not be something that anyone should play around with. And I'm sure Malacanang has already answered regarding this. But I will discuss that in another program, revolution, counter-revolution, because I went through that at the Philippine Center for Advanced Studies at the University of the Philippines. And I will let you know how the studies came from revolutions and counter-revolutions, and that at this stage, we cannot do this by any of these movements that are coming out. And likewise, there could be another revolution within each and every one of us if we can be able to imbibe the internal change of a new society, the ideology of being a Filipino first and foremost, to be able to bring the greatness of ourselves, each and every one of us, to surface this. So until the next time, I'd like to thank you for listening in, and I hope that next program we will be able to have other discussions regarding this. Maraming salamat po. This is Rita Gadi for your hour.